The unexpected traffic stop. The streets of Los Angeles were alive with their usual chaotic energy, honking horns, hurried pedestrians, and the constant hum of a city that never seemed to rest. Amidst the urban rush, a sleek black Bugatti Chiron glided smoothly through the streets, its engine purring like a beast restrained. Behind the wheel sat none other than Keanu Reeves, the world-renowned actor known for his humility and kindness, despite his massive success. Keanu had always preferred motorcycles over luxury cars, but today was different. The Bugatti wasn't his. It belonged to a close friend, a car enthusiast, who had insisted that he take it for a spin. "Come on, Keanu," his friend had laughed earlier that day, handing him the keys. "You live once, buddy. Drive something that matches your talent for once." Reluctantly, Keanu had agreed. It wasn't that he had an aversion to luxury. He simply never saw the need for excess. But sometimes, stepping outside of his usual routine led to unexpected experiences, and today would lead to something more than just a joyride. As Keanu drove through downtown LA, he enjoyed the simple pleasure of being alone, away from the flashing cameras and relentless attention. The soft hum of music played through the speakers, and the cool breeze from the open window brushed against his face. It was a rare moment of peace in a life that often felt too public. But just as he reached an intersection, something shifted in the air. The unmistakable red and blue flashing lights of a police car appeared in his rearview mirror. A frown creased his forehead. What could this be about? Keanu wasn't speeding. He wasn't doing anything wrong. Yet here it was, a signal that his calm, solitary drive was about to take a turn. Keanu eased the Bugatti to the side of the road and came to a stop. The officer's car pulled in behind him, and the flashing lights continued to pulse in the dimming evening light, casting an eerie glow on the street. Keanu turned off the engine and sat for a moment, wondering what was going on. He had been pulled over by officers before, but this felt different. A tall, stern-looking officer stepped out of the patrol car. She wore the standard uniform, her posture stiff as she approached the Bugatti. Keanu recognized her instantly. Officer Marissa Alvarez, a veteran on the force, known for her no-nonsense approach to policing. Her face was hard to read, but Keanu could tell that something was off. He rolled down the window slowly, offering a friendly smile. "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" Officer Alvarez paused for a moment before speaking. "License and registration, please," she said, her voice steady but impersonal. Keanu reached for his wallet, taking the moment to retrieve his driver's license and the car's registration, which his friend had handed him earlier. As he handed them over, he noticed the officer's eyes lingering on him for a moment longer than usual. She didn't seem starstruck, nor did she show any signs of recognition. Keanu had always appreciated how, in many situations, people didn't treat him differently because of his fame. But this felt different. The officer was looking at him with something akin to suspicion. "Is everything all right, officer?" Keanu asked gently, trying to break the tension. "I wasn't speeding, and I don't think I've done anything wrong." Officer Alvarez didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a long look at the car, then at Keanu. "It's not about speeding, Mr. Reeves," she said finally. "There's been a report of suspicious activity in the area. We're just doing our job." Keanu nodded, his mind already processing the situation. "I understand," he said, trying to keep the mood light. "I'm just here to enjoy a drive and clear my head." The officer didn't respond to that. Instead, she took a step back and returned to her patrol car, where she spoke into her radio. Keanu sat back in the driver's seat, tapping his fingers against the wheel, wondering what was taking so long. The minutes stretched out, and he began to feel a sense of unease growing in his chest. After what felt like an eternity, Officer Alvarez returned, but this time, her expression had changed. She looked tired, almost defeated. There was no trace of the stern professionalism from earlier, and for the first time, Keanu saw something else in her eyes: vulnerability. "I'm sorry to keep you waiting," she said quietly. "I just had to double-check something. It's been a rough day." Keanu raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Is everything all right, officer?" Officer Alvarez paused, then shook her head. "It's just life sometimes, you know. Nothing ever seems to go right, and then you're stuck dealing with things that don't make sense. It's just a lot to carry." Keanu was taken aback. The tough exterior she had worn earlier was gone, and in its place was someone who seemed like she was carrying a heavy burden. Without thinking, Keanu did something that felt natural to him. He leaned out of the car and smiled warmly. "Life can be tough sometimes," he said, his voice soft but genuine. "But it's also full of moments where things can turn around. Maybe this is one of those moments." The officer looked at him, her expression softening. "I don't know about that," she replied, her voice laced with skepticism. "I'm just trying to do my job and make it through the day." Keanu nodded, understanding more than she knew. "I get it, but sometimes all it takes is a small act of kindness to change the course of your day. You never know when something might surprise you." Officer Alvarez looked at him for a long moment, her gaze lingering. It was clear that something had shifted in her, even if just for a brief second. She let out a small sigh, then handed Keanu back his license and registration. "Thanks for being patient, Mr. Reeves," she said, her tone now more relaxed. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience. You're free to go." Keanu took the papers from her, but before he started the car, he looked up at her one last time. "You take care of yourself, officer," he said. "Remember, sometimes things get better when you least expect it." For the first time, in what seemed like ages, Officer Alvarez cracked a small smile. "Thanks. You too, Mr. Reeves." With that, Keanu started the engine, his Bugatti purring to life once more. As he pulled back into the flow of traffic, he couldn't help but feel a sense of warmth in his chest. It wasn't about the car or the encounter itself. It was about the small moment of connection, the quiet understanding that sometimes even the smallest gesture could help someone see the light at the end of the tunnel. Keanu knew that this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning of something far deeper. The unexpected encounter. The city lights of Los Angeles blurred into a mosaic of colors as Keanu drove through the streets, his thoughts drifting between the events of the past hour. The conversation with Officer Alvarez had been brief, but it had stayed with him. It wasn't often that someone who seemed so composed and in control would reveal such a vulnerable side. There was something in her eyes that lingered in his mind, an unspoken burden that she carried with her, hidden beneath the weight of her uniform and the demands of her job. Keanu, who had long been familiar with the struggles of balancing public life with personal turmoil, couldn't help but empathize with the officer. He'd been fortunate enough to have found solace in his quiet moments of solitude, riding his motorcycles on empty highways, or simply sitting with a book in a peaceful corner of his home. But not everyone had that luxury. Not everyone had the space to reflect and recharge. He could see that in Officer Alvarez. She was doing her best, but the cracks were there, and they were starting to show. As he turned off the main street and began navigating through quieter parts of the city, Keanu found himself grappling with a deeper question. Could he do something more? Could he help her in some small way, even if he didn't fully understand the nature of her struggles? His mind wandered back to the small interaction they'd shared. There was an authenticity in her reaction, something that hinted at the kind of kindness and vulnerability that most people didn't expect from someone in her position. Keanu had seen it in others before, the way people sometimes wore their pain like armor, keeping it hidden behind their actions and appearances. The world was full of people who went unnoticed, who struggled in silence, each carrying their own story. Keanu had often felt that way himself. His success and fame only masked the deeper, personal challenges he had faced over the years. He had learned that kindness, real, raw kindness, often came from the most unexpected places. Maybe this was one of those moments. Maybe there was a way he could reach out and make a difference, no matter how small. As Keanu continued his drive, he found himself reflecting on his own experiences. The fame and recognition had always been a double-edged sword. On one hand, it gave him opportunities to impact the world in ways that most people never could. But on the other hand, it created walls between him and others, barriers that made it hard to connect on a deeper level. That was why Keanu had always made an effort to stay grounded, to remain humble and approachable. He knew how fleeting fame could be, how easily it could distort relationships and cloud one's perspective. He had seen it happen to others, watched as people lost themselves in the chase for more success, more money, more attention, only to find themselves hollow at the core. It was a lesson he had learned early on, and it was one that had guided him through his career and personal life. But as much as he had worked to stay grounded, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of isolation. The more people recognized him, the more difficult it became to find genuine connections. In a world that constantly demanded more from him, it was hard to find moments of real vulnerability, moments where he could simply be himself, without the weight of expectations hanging over him. It was in this quiet solitude, driving through the empty streets of Los Angeles, that Keanu realized something. Maybe it wasn't about the grand gestures or the elaborate acts of charity that defined a person's worth. Maybe it was about the small, everyday moments, the connections that happened when no one was watching. Maybe, just maybe, helping someone didn't have to be a public spectacle. It could be as simple as offering a kind word or a moment of understanding. Keanu wasn't sure what it would look like, but he knew he wanted to reach out to Officer Alvarez, not as a celebrity, not as someone who could change her life with a donation or a grand gesture, but simply as a person who understood what it was like to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. He pulled the Bugatti into a parking lot outside a small cafe, one of his favorite spots to retreat to when he needed to clear his mind. The cafe was quiet, tucked away from the noise of the city, and it offered the perfect environment for reflection. As he parked the car, Keanu decided that he wasn't going to let this moment pass by. He had a feeling that Officer Alvarez needed someone to talk to, someone who could understand, even if only for a brief moment. Inside the cafe, Keanu found a small table near the window, overlooking the bustling street outside. He ordered a simple cup of coffee, the warmth of the drink providing a sense of comfort in the midst of his thoughts. As he sat there, waiting for the coffee to arrive, he couldn't help but wonder about the officer's life. What had led her to this point? What was it that made her so resilient in the face of everything that life had thrown her way? The truth was, Keanu didn't have all the answers, and he didn't need them. All he knew was that sometimes the most meaningful connections came when you least expected them. And in that moment, he was determined to see if he could make a difference, however small it might be. It wasn't long before Keanu's phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from his friend, the one who had lent him the Bugatti. "Hey, how's the drive? Hope you're enjoying the car. Let me know if you need a ride back. Sounds like LA traffic is a nightmare." Keanu smiled to himself, his thoughts momentarily drifting away from Officer Alvarez. He quickly typed back a response. "It's been good, thanks. But I think I found something more important than the car." He paused before hitting send, thinking about how much his life had changed over the years. He'd never imagined he'd be sitting in a quiet cafe, reflecting on a brief traffic stop, and deciding to reach out to a stranger in need of connection. But that was the beauty of life. It was unpredictable. It was full of moments that could change everything. With the message sent, Keanu took a deep breath, savoring the quiet stillness of the cafe. He had no idea what the next few hours would bring, but he was ready for whatever came next. And if the opportunity arose to reach out to Officer Alvarez in some small way, to show her the same kindness and understanding that she had shown him, then he would take it. After all, sometimes the most unexpected encounters were the ones that had the power to change everything. As the coffee arrived, Keanu's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Officer Alvarez. "Hi, Mr. Reeves. I just wanted to thank you again for your patience earlier. You didn't have to say what you did, but it meant a lot. I don't know what I'm doing half the time. But it's nice to know that not everyone expects me to have it all figured out." Keanu smiled as he read her message. The connection was real, and it had only just begun. The ripple effect. Keanu sat back in his chair, sipping his coffee as the soft hum of the cafe buzzed around him. His phone still sat on the table, the screen glowing from the recent message he had received from Officer Alvarez. A small part of him had hoped she might respond, but the sincerity of her words struck him more deeply than he had expected. It was clear that the officer's day had been filled with frustrations, challenges, and a quiet loneliness that she had tried to conceal behind her professional exterior. But now, in the comfort of a few simple messages, a bridge of understanding had formed between them. For the first time in a long while, Keanu felt a sense of peace. It wasn't just because he had made a positive impact on someone's life, but because he had seen the power of human connection in its simplest form. It wasn't about grandeur or fame. It was about being seen, truly seen, and showing kindness without any expectation of something in return. As he sat in the quiet cafe, his mind began to wander, reflecting on the unspoken thread that connected all people, regardless of status or profession. It was easy to forget, especially in a world that seemed obsessed with appearance, success, and accolades, that underneath it all, everyone carried something. Whether it was a heavy burden, a personal struggle, or a quiet longing, everyone had their own story to tell. Keanu had learned that the most impactful stories weren't the ones told on the big screen, but the ones shared in a brief conversation, a moment of vulnerability, or an unexpected connection. It was in those moments that true empathy could flourish, and Keanu had experienced that firsthand with Officer Alvarez. In that short exchange, she had shared something real with him, something she wasn't required to share. She had let her guard down, even if just for a brief second, and it had allowed Keanu to see a side of her that most people would never have the privilege to witness. Keanu had always prided himself on being genuine, but this was something new. He had made a connection with a person in a way he hadn't with anyone in a long time. And it wasn't because she was a fan of his work or because of his fame. It was because, for a brief moment, he had just been a person offering a kind word to another person who needed it. The ripple effect of that small act of kindness was something Keanu couldn't ignore. It wasn't just about making someone feel seen or understood in that moment. It was about what would happen afterward. How would that interaction affect Officer Alvarez in the coming days or weeks? Would it inspire her to be kinder to herself? Would it change how she interacted with others, especially those who might be struggling like she was? Keanu couldn't help but think that the world needed more of these quiet moments, more spaces where people could just be honest, vulnerable, and real without the fear of judgment or expectation. He thought back to his own experiences, both in the entertainment industry and in his personal life. How often had he felt the pressure to be something he wasn't? How many times had he buried his own struggles because he didn't want to appear weak or incapable? It was a struggle he knew all too well. He had always been someone who valued solitude, and for good reason. It was in those quiet moments of being alone with his thoughts that Keanu had been able to heal from the losses and disappointments in his life. The fame, the constant media scrutiny, and the public's expectations had made it difficult to maintain any sense of normalcy. The friends who had come and gone, the challenges in his personal life, and the ever-present spotlight had all contributed to a sense of isolation that was hard to shake. But it was also in that solitude that Keanu had found a kind of strength. It had taught him the value of introspection and the importance of being kind to oneself. Still, he knew that even the most introspective person needed connection. Humans weren't meant to live in isolation, no matter how much they might crave it. The simple truth was, we all needed each other, even if we didn't always know it. Keanu's phone buzzed again, pulling him from his thoughts. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. He opened the message to find a familiar name, Officer Alvarez. "Hi, Mr. Reeves. I know this might seem a little out of the blue, but I've been thinking about our conversation earlier. I wanted to thank you again for your kindness. I don't know what I was expecting when I stopped you today, but I didn't think I'd be talking to someone who would actually listen. I guess I was just going through a tough time, and it felt like everything was piling on top of me. Your words made me realize that maybe I don't have to carry everything on my own." Keanu smiled as he read her message. His instinct to reach out to her had felt right, but seeing her words made it clear that their brief interaction had meant more to her than he could have imagined. She had been carrying a weight, a burden that she had kept hidden from the world, and for just a moment, she had allowed herself to open up. Keanu knew how rare that was. He quickly typed a response. "I'm really glad my words could help, Officer Alvarez. Just remember, you're not alone in this. You don't have to carry everything by yourself. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here." As soon as he hit send, Keanu realized how simple that offer had been. It didn't require anything grand, no celebrity status, no act of charity. It was just an offer of genuine understanding, the kind of gesture that, at its core, was what people needed most. The next few days passed in a blur of interviews and meetings, but Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted within him. His encounter with Officer Alvarez had sparked something deeper, a longing to make a difference, not in grandiose ways, but in quiet, meaningful ways. He began to reflect more on his own actions and the impact they had on those around him, both directly and indirectly. Keanu's fame had given him a platform, but it was his humanity that had made him relatable to others. It was the way he responded to the struggles of others, offering understanding and kindness without an agenda. He wasn't a superhero. He was just a man, like everyone else, trying to navigate life's challenges while staying true to who he was. And that, he realized, was where the real change began, not with grand gestures or public displays, but with small, everyday actions that rippled outward, touching lives in ways that couldn't always be measured. Keanu made it a point to reach out to Officer Alvarez again, just to check in. It wasn't a grand gesture, it was just a text, a simple message to let her know that he was thinking of her. And when she replied, her words were full of gratitude, as though the connection they had forged was something that had sustained her during a difficult time. It was in those small moments that Keanu saw the power of kindness, the ripple effect that came from showing empathy and understanding. And in that realization, he knew that sometimes the most significant changes came not from the spotlight, but from the quiet, everyday interactions that people shared with one another. It was a reminder that no matter where life took him, the most meaningful part of his journey would always be the connections he made along the way. The heart of kindness. The days following his encounter with Officer Alvarez unfolded quietly for Keanu. The world outside his own personal reflections moved at a fast pace, as it always did in Los Angeles. He attended film sets, went to meetings, and occasionally took a moment for himself, enjoying the solitude he had come to cherish. But even in the business of his life, Officer Alvarez's words remained with him. The brief, yet profound, exchange they had shared continued to reverberate in the back of his mind, creating a subtle shift in the way he viewed the world around him. Keanu had always been someone who preferred simplicity, a man of few words and even fewer grand gestures. But the kindness he had shared with Alvarez, and the way it had impacted her, made him realize just how powerful those small moments of human connection could be. He found himself reflecting on his own life, on the people he had met, the friendships he had cultivated, and even the hardships he had overcome. In each of those moments, kindness had played a pivotal role. Sometimes it was an act of kindness toward him. Other times, it was his own small gesture that had made a difference in someone else's life. But it wasn't just the kindness he had shown to Alvarez that stayed with him. It was the way that kindness had been returned to him in ways he hadn't expected. When he'd offered his words of encouragement to Officer Alvarez, he hadn't known what it would mean for her. He hadn't expected her to reach out again or share her vulnerabilities. Yet she had done so, and that made him realize something important. Kindness had a ripple effect, one that extended far beyond the moment it was given. That realization stayed with Keanu as he walked through the halls of his next film set, his footsteps echoing against the polished floors. It was a familiar feeling, the way the energy of a movie set pulsed with anticipation, with everyone eager to make the next shot or wrap up the next scene. It was a dance, and Keanu had become accustomed to the rhythm of it. But that afternoon, there was a subtle change in him. He wasn't as focused on the hustle of his career or the constant need to perform. Instead, he found himself thinking about the people around him, the crew members, the extras, and the staff who worked tirelessly behind the scenes. All of them had their own lives, their own stories. All of them had their own struggles. Keanu stopped at a small break room on the set, deciding to grab a cup of coffee before heading back to his trailer. As he walked in, he noticed a young woman sitting at one of the tables, her eyes fixed on her phone, as she absent-mindedly stirred a cup of tea. Keanu had seen her before. She was an assistant on the set, one of the many people who worked tirelessly behind the scenes, yet remained largely unnoticed by the actors. She looked exhausted, her face slightly drawn, as if the weight of her responsibilities had begun to take its toll. Keanu had always made it a point to be friendly and approachable with everyone on set, from the actors to the crew, but he also understood the boundaries of celebrity. People often didn't know how to approach him, or if they should even try, so he decided to break the ice, as he often did, with a simple greeting. "Mind if I join you?" Keanu asked, flashing a gentle smile. The young woman looked up in surprise, as though startled by his presence, but when she saw who it was, her expression shifted to one of surprise, and then to a cautious but warm smile. "Of course, Mr. Reeves. I didn't expect you to be here." Keanu chuckled softly as he took a seat across from her. "I'm not always in the spotlight, you know. Sometimes I just need a quiet moment like anyone else." She nodded, but Keanu could tell that her thoughts were elsewhere. There was a distance in her eyes, an emptiness that spoke volumes. "Everything all right?" Keanu asked, his voice sincere. The assistant hesitated for a moment, her fingers still wrapped around her cup of tea. It's a lot," she said, her voice soft. "This job, it's demanding, and it doesn't always feel like it's enough. No one really notices the little things we do behind the scenes, you know. And sometimes, it feels like you're invisible, like you're giving everything and not getting much in return." Keanu listened carefully, understanding the weight of her words. It wasn't the first time he'd heard someone express this kind of frustration, but there was something in her voice that made him stop and think. She wasn't complaining for attention. She was simply sharing a truth that most people never bothered to acknowledge. The unsung heroes, the people who made everything work, but didn't get the recognition or appreciation they deserved. He leaned forward slightly, his expression thoughtful. "I get it," he said quietly. "I've been in a lot of situations where I felt the same way. People see the finished product, the movie, the success, the fame, but they don't see the work that goes into it, the long hours, the sacrifices, the personal struggles. And sometimes, it can feel like all of that goes unnoticed." The assistant's eyes widened slightly, as though she hadn't expected Keanu to understand or even care. "You know, I've always heard you were down to earth, but I didn't realize how much you really understood. It's nice to hear someone acknowledge it for once." Keanu smiled softly. "Sometimes people just need to feel seen. It doesn't have to be a big thing, you know. Just a moment of connection, a simple gesture. It can make all the difference." The assistant paused, then let out a sigh, her shoulders slumping as the tension in her body eased. "I've been thinking about quitting, actually," she admitted quietly. "It feels like I'm giving so much of myself, and for what? To be overlooked. To keep pushing forward without ever getting a chance to breathe." Keanu nodded, understanding all too well. "I get it," he repeated, his voice firm but kind. "But before you make any decisions, just think about why you're doing what you're doing. Is it because you truly enjoy it, or because you're trying to live up to someone else's expectations? Sometimes, it's not about the accolades. It's about finding meaning in the work itself, in the moments where you can make a difference, even if no one else notices." The assistant blinked, her expression softening as she absorbed his words. "I never thought about it that way," she said quietly. "Maybe I've been too focused on the wrong things. I'm always looking for validation from others instead of finding it within myself." Keanu smiled gently. "Validation can be a tricky thing. It's nice to be recognized for your efforts, but at the end of the day, it's the internal validation that keeps us going. The quiet satisfaction of knowing you've done something well, even if no one else knows it. And that's something no one can take away from you." The assistant looked down at her tea, lost in thought. For a moment, the two of them sat in silence, each contemplating the weight of their own experiences. Keanu knew that the conversation had made an impact. It wasn't a grand revelation, nor was it a moment of profound change, but it was something that could start a shift, a small crack in the wall of self-doubt and frustration that the young woman had been holding onto. When she finally spoke again, her voice was steadier. "Thanks, Mr. Reeves. I didn't think I needed to hear that, but I think I really did." Keanu nodded, offering a quiet but sincere smile. "Anytime. Just remember, it's the little things that matter. And sometimes you have to be the one to recognize your own worth." As he stood up to leave, Keanu gave her a final look. "Take care of yourself. And if you ever need someone to talk to, don't hesitate to reach out. No one should have to feel invisible." The assistant watched him walk away, her expression softer now, a small glimmer of hope in her eyes. Keanu knew that this encounter, like the one with Officer Alvarez, wasn't about changing everything at once. It was about planting a seed, a small gesture of kindness that could grow and transform someone's perspective, piece by piece. In that moment, Keanu realized that kindness wasn't just a ripple, it was a chain reaction. One act of compassion, no matter how small, could spark a wave of change that spread far beyond the initial interaction. And that, he knew, was the heart of kindness. It was the thread that connected everyone, regardless of where they came from or what they had been through. It was the quiet power that, when shared, had the ability to heal, to uplift, and to change the world in ways that no one could fully predict. As Keanu left the break room and returned to the set, his heart felt lighter, as though the weight of the world had been lifted, if only for a moment. In the simplest of conversations, he had made a difference, and he knew that this was only the beginning, a spark in the dark. The weeks that followed Keanu's quiet conversations with Officer Alvarez and the young assistant felt like a turning point in his life, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. There was something undeniably different in the air, a subtle shift within him that couldn't be ignored. He had always been the type to remain grounded, to focus on the simple things in life, but these small moments, these quiet exchanges of kindness, had become more than just random encounters. They were a reminder of something deeper, something more profound. Keanu's days on set were filled with the usual hustle and bustle of making a movie. There were scripts to review, scenes to rehearse, and a constant flurry of activity that never seemed to slow down. But even in the midst of the controlled chaos, Keanu found himself distracted by something he couldn't shake. It wasn't the high-profile work or the excitement of a new film project. It was the idea that kindness, that genuine human connection, was the true source of lasting fulfillment. He spent long hours reflecting on his own life. For years, he had been successful in his career, amassing accolades and recognition for his work. But despite the outward trappings of success, there had always been an undercurrent of loneliness that followed him around. The fame, the adoration, the privilege, it all came at a price. The more he achieved, the more distanced he became from the world around him. People treated him differently because of his fame. They saw him as a figure to be admired, but not as a person to connect with. It was a paradox that Keanu had learned to live with, but one that never ceased to create a sense of isolation. It wasn't until those quiet moments with Officer Alvarez and the assistant on set that he began to realize how much he had been missing. The human connections he had taken for granted were the ones that gave life its real meaning. He wasn't sure how to describe it, this quiet understanding that had blossomed inside of him, but it was undeniable. One afternoon, as he sat in his trailer between scenes, Keanu found himself contemplating the nature of these connections. It was easy to forget in the fast-paced world of Hollywood, but life was full of moments, small, fleeting moments, that had the potential to change someone's life. Whether it was a kind word, a simple gesture, or an unexpected show of understanding, these acts of kindness had the power to alter the course of someone's day, their week, or even their life. Keanu realized that he had the power to make a difference. It wasn't just about big, public gestures or high-profile charity work. It was about being there for people in the moments when they needed someone, when they felt invisible or alone. It was about showing up for others, even when it wasn't convenient, even when no one else would. A couple of days after his conversation with the young assistant, Keanu found himself walking through the lot, heading back to his trailer after wrapping up a scene. As he passed through the set, he noticed a familiar face, a crew member who had worked on a few of his previous films. Her name was Sarah, and though they'd never really spoken outside of work, Keanu always admired her quiet diligence. She was one of those people who was always working in the background, her focus unwavering as she made sure everything went smoothly. As Keanu walked by, Sarah looked up and gave him a hesitant smile. Keanu, as always, smiled back warmly, but this time something in his chest tightened. He couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah had been struggling. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, and there was a quiet sadness about her demeanor that caught Keanu's attention. Without thinking, Keanu stopped in his tracks. "Hey, Sarah," he said, his voice gentle. "How's everything going?" Sarah blinked in surprise, clearly not expecting him to engage. She paused for a moment, as if trying to decide whether to offer a genuine response or simply brush it off. Eventually, she sighed, lowering her gaze to the ground. "It's been tough," she admitted quietly. "I've been working nonstop, and it just feels like there's no end in sight. And with everything else going on in my personal life, it's been hard to keep up." Keanu nodded, sensing the weight in her voice. He had been in her shoes before, feeling as though life was just pushing him forward without pause, without giving him the space to breathe. It was easy to get lost in the demands of everyday life, to feel like you were giving your all, and still coming up short. "I get it," Keanu said, his tone steady and understanding. "Sometimes it feels like you're doing everything right, but it's still not enough. But that doesn't mean you're failing. It just means you're human." Sarah looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of insincerity. But there was none. Keanu meant every word. It was rare for people to acknowledge how hard life could be, how overwhelming it felt to juggle responsibilities and personal struggles. In Keanu's experience, it was easy to become invisible in a world that only saw the finished product, the polished performance, the flawless result. But the real work, the real effort, was often done behind the scenes, in moments of quiet vulnerability. "Thanks, Keanu," Sarah said, her voice softer now. "I don't know why I'm telling you this, but it's nice to hear someone say that. I guess I've been putting a lot of pressure on myself to keep going without ever stopping to think about whether I'm doing okay." Keanu smiled warmly, offering her a reassuring look. "You don't have to be perfect. None of us do. We all have our days when we're struggling, when things aren't going the way we want. It's okay to take a step back, to ask for help, or just to give yourself a break." For a moment, Sarah simply looked at him, her face softened by his words. It was clear that this small interaction, this unexpected moment of understanding, had made an impact. She seemed lighter, more present, as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Thanks for that," she said, her voice tinged with gratitude. "It's easy to forget that sometimes." Keanu nodded, his eyes meeting hers with sincerity. "It's easy to forget that we're all just doing our best, no matter how it looks on the outside. You're doing great, Sarah. Keep going at your own pace." With a final smile, he turned and continued walking toward his trailer. As he did, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. This was it. This was what mattered. Not the fame, not the recognition, not the accolades. It was the small, quiet moments when you could offer someone a sliver of hope, a glimmer of understanding, or simply a reminder that they weren't alone in their struggles. Keanu's encounter with Sarah, much like his conversations with Officer Alvarez and the young assistant, wasn't a grand act of heroism. It wasn't about changing the world in an instant. It was about offering a moment of connection, a reminder that people didn't have to carry their burdens alone. In a world that often felt disconnected, those small sparks of humanity were what truly made a difference. As Keanu entered his trailer, he felt the weight of the world lift off his shoulders. The movie would go on. The set would continue its frenetic pace, but he knew that the most important work he could do was the quiet, unseen work, the work of showing up for others, of listening, of offering kindness when it was needed most. And as he sat down, staring out at the sunset beyond the studio lot, Keanu realized that this was the true power of kindness. It wasn't about grand gestures or public displays. It was the quiet, steady flame that could light up the darkest corners of the world, one person at a time. The light in the shadows. Keanu sat quietly in his trailer, the familiar hum of the set outside stilling in the distance. It was a rare moment of silence, a brief respite from the flurry of activity that always surrounded him. He had always appreciated these solitary moments, where the world could slow down just enough to let him breathe and reflect. But in this moment, his mind was preoccupied, not with his film career or the upcoming scenes, but with the deeper meaning that had been unfolding in his life since his encounters with Officer Alvarez, the young assistant, and Sarah. Each of these brief, seemingly inconsequential conversations had started as nothing more than a passing moment. Yet each one had created a ripple, a quiet but powerful shift that had made Keanu realize something profound about the way he viewed the world and the people in it. He had always believed in the importance of kindness, but he now understood that kindness wasn't just about offering help in times of need. It was about seeing others for who they truly were, beyond the surface, and understanding that every person carried a story, a struggle, and a journey that often went unnoticed. Keanu wasn't sure where this understanding had come from. Perhaps it was a slow accumulation of years spent in the public eye, observing the pressures and isolation that fame could create. Or perhaps it had always been there, just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moments to emerge. But now, more than ever, he understood that what truly mattered in life was the connection he made with people, the ones he encountered by chance, the ones who worked tirelessly behind the scenes, and even the ones he might never see again. The sunlight outside the trailer cast long shadows across the lot as the day began to wind down. Keanu's thoughts shifted to Officer Alvarez. He hadn't heard from her in a few days, but he could still recall the depth of emotion in her voice when she had shared her struggles. She had been so guarded at first, so determined to maintain control, but after their brief conversation, something had shifted. He could tell that she was starting to let her walls down, even if only a little. Keanu had reached out to her a few times since, offering simple words of encouragement, checking in to see how she was doing. He could sense that her gratitude was real, but there was still something unspoken between them, an understanding that they both shared but didn't fully address. What was it that made people so hesitant to open up? Keanu thought. Why did we all carry our burdens in silence, as if acknowledging them would make them heavier? It was something Keanu had pondered many times over the years. He understood the loneliness that came with being in the spotlight, but even more so, he understood the weight of the unsung struggles, the personal battles that people fought every day without ever letting others see the scars. It was on that thought that Keanu stood up and walked toward the door of his trailer. His intuition told him that something more was waiting for him, something deeper than just the occasional conversation. And so, he decided to act. Stepping outside, he looked around the set, watching the crew begin to pack up for the day. It was the perfect time to reach out to someone. It wasn't about the need for validation or attention. It was about reaching beyond the surface and showing that he cared. He didn't need anything in return. It was the connection, the genuine human exchange, that mattered. He made his way through the lot and spotted Officer Alvarez standing near a row of parked cars, talking to one of her colleagues. She looked up as Keanu approached, her eyes lighting up with surprise. For a brief moment, she hesitated, as if unsure of how to react to his unexpected presence. "Hey, Officer Alvarez," Keanu said, offering a friendly smile. She paused, then waved him over. "Keanu, this is a surprise," she said, her tone a mix of amusement and genuine warmth. Keanu stepped closer, feeling the familiarity of their previous encounter settle between them. "I just wanted to check in," he said, his voice soft but genuine. "How have you been?" Officer Alvarez looked at him, a small frown appearing as she considered the question. She had seemed to have it all together when they had spoken last, but now she looked tired, exhausted even. There was a vulnerability in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "I've been okay," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "I've been dealing with some things. Work has been overwhelming, and honestly, I'm not sure how much longer I can keep this up." She looked away for a moment, her gaze lingering on the parking lot. "Sometimes, it just feels like everything's too much." Keanu nodded in understanding, his gaze compassionate. "I get it. It's hard to keep going when it feels like the weight of the world is on your shoulders. But you don't have to carry it alone." Officer Alvarez looked at him, her brow furrowing slightly. There was something raw and honest about the way he spoke, as if he truly understood what she was going through. "I don't really have anyone to talk to about this stuff," she admitted, her voice shaking ever so slightly. "And I'm always expected to be strong, to just get through it. But I don't know if I can anymore." Keanu took a step closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "You don't have to be strong all the time. It's okay to not have it all figured out, and it's okay to ask for help when you need it. No one has to carry the weight of everything alone. Not you. Not anyone." For a moment, Officer Alvarez was silent, her eyes focused on the ground as if she was processing his words. Then, to Keanu's surprise, she stepped forward and placed a hand on his arm, as though the act itself was an acknowledgement of the comfort she found in his words. I think I needed to hear that more than I realized," she said softly. "Thank you, Keanu. You have no idea how much that means to me right now." Keanu offered her a sincere smile, the kind of smile that wasn't about offering advice or making everything better, but about offering connection. "Anytime. I know what it's like to carry that weight, and I want you to know you don't have to carry it alone. Whatever you're going through, I'm here." There was a pause as she took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long while, Officer Alvarez allowed herself to look up at him with a sense of hope in her eyes. I think I might take a break. A real one, not just going through the motions. Maybe I'll reach out to someone. Talk to a friend." Keanu nodded, his eyes full of empathy. "That's the first step. You don't have to have all the answers. Just take things one day at a time." They stood there for a moment, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Keanu knew that, in that brief exchange, he had done something more than just offer advice. He had given her permission to be vulnerable, to ask for help, and most importantly, to prioritize her own well-being. As they parted ways, Keanu felt a small but significant shift in the air, a quiet shift that confirmed what he had known all along. The most profound moments in life weren't the ones filled with accolades or applause. They were the ones where people found the courage to connect with one another, to share their struggles, and to offer empathy when it was needed the most. As Keanu walked back to his trailer, he realized that the light in the shadows wasn't something that needed to be searched for. It was something that could be found by simply reaching out, by offering kindness in the places where darkness had once seemed impenetrable. And in that realization, Keanu found a deeper peace than any recognition or accolade could ever bring. It was the peace that came from knowing that, no matter how small the gesture, kindness could always illuminate the way forward. The ripple of humanity. The days continued to flow by, a steady stream of work and reflection for Keanu. Each day, The world around him seemed to pulse with its frenetic energy, but within him, something had changed. The experiences, the conversations with Officer Alvarez, Sarah, and the young assistant were like stones tossed into a still pond, creating ripples that spread farther than he had ever anticipated. His interactions with them, seemingly small at the time, had become pivotal moments in his life. A reminder of how deeply the simple act of being human could affect another person. As much as Keanu had always embraced solitude, he found himself seeking out more of these small moments. His role in the world, the films, the fame, had often made him feel like an observer, standing on the outside looking in. But now he was beginning to feel like he was truly living within the story of his own life, participating in the narrative, and connecting with others in ways that were far more meaningful than anything he had experienced before. One crisp morning, as the sun rose over the horizon and painted the sky in soft hues of gold and pink, Keanu found himself once again reflecting on the conversations he had shared with people who worked behind the scenes. He had spoken with many actors and filmmakers over the years, but the real connections, the ones that had moved him the most, had come from people who were often unseen. He thought about Sarah, the assistant who had been on the brink of quitting but now carried a renewed sense of hope. He thought about Officer Alvarez, who had taken the brave step of acknowledging her own struggles and vulnerabilities. And then, there was the young assistant who had once felt invisible but had been given the space to share her worries and receive kindness in return. The ripple effect was undeniable. Each person had walked away from their encounter with Keanu carrying something different. For Sarah, it had been the realization that she wasn't alone in her struggles and that asking for help didn't mean weakness. For Officer Alvarez, it had been the understanding that it was okay to be imperfect, to take a moment to breathe, and to trust that she could lean on others. For the assistant, it had been a simple reminder that her value wasn't defined by what others saw, but by the quiet work she did with passion and dedication. Keanu smiled to himself as he prepared for another day of filming. But this time, the energy was different. There was something fresh in the air. It was as though he had been given a new perspective on life, a perspective that wasn't just about success or fame, but about the subtle, yet powerful, connections that could be forged between people. When he arrived on set that morning, his thoughts were still with those conversations. He couldn't help but wonder, how many people went through life feeling unseen, feeling as though their struggles were invisible to the world? And how often did those people carry on, silently enduring, simply because no one took the time to ask how they were truly doing? Keanu had learned something important over the past few weeks. The simplest acts of kindness, listening, offering understanding, giving someone the space to speak their truth, had the power to change the course of someone's day, or even their life. It was the quiet gestures that often made the most profound difference, far more than the grand displays that the world often revered. As the crew moved into position for another scene, Keanu found himself reflecting on how these small moments were starting to shape his future. He knew that, for him, this new understanding wasn't just a fleeting realization. It was a fundamental shift in how he saw himself and the people around him. His work, his fame, had often kept him isolated, distant, but now, he felt connected in a way that he never had before. During a break between scenes, Keanu wandered over to where a group of crew members was gathered. He recognized a few of them, people who had been with him through multiple films, but whom he had never truly spoken to beyond the usual pleasantries. Today, however, there was a lightness in his step. His heart was open, and the weight of his own previous loneliness had shifted. There was something about this moment that felt right for connection. "Hey, everyone," Keanu said with a warm, easy smile as he approached the group. "How's everyone doing today?" The crew members looked up in surprise, some of them a bit stunned that the star of the film was approaching them like any other colleague. But there was something about his presence today, a quiet sincerity, that immediately put them at ease. "We're good, Keanu," one of the sound engineers replied, smiling in return. "It's been a long day, but we're powering through." "Thanks for asking." Keanu nodded, feeling the simple power of that moment. The small exchange made him realize how often people felt overlooked, even when they were surrounded by others. In the world of movies and entertainment, it was easy for everyone to get caught up in their own worlds. The actors, the directors, the producers, each had their own space in the limelight. But the crew, the people who made everything run behind the scenes, often remained invisible to the public eye. Keanu's thoughts turned back to Officer Alvarez, to Sarah, to the young assistant, all of whom had felt unseen in some way. Their experiences had made him realize that even the most well-intentioned people often missed the chance to connect with those who weren't immediately in the spotlight. And for the first time, he understood that he had the power to change that, even in the smallest of ways. "Listen," Keanu said, his voice steady and kind. "I know we're all here to do a job, but I just wanted to take a moment and thank you all. You're the ones who make this whole thing work. Without all the behind-the-scenes effort, none of this would happen. I know it's not always glamorous, but it doesn't go unnoticed." The crew looked at each other, unsure of how to respond, but a few of them smiled shyly, clearly touched by the sincerity of his words. "You know, Keanu," one of the grips said, "that really means a lot. We work hard, and sometimes it feels like no one notices, but hearing you say that makes it feel worth it." Keanu smiled, a soft, understanding smile that didn't come from a place of obligation, but from a place of real recognition. Everyone deserves to be seen. I think it's easy to forget how much effort it takes to make things work, but it's the people who go unnoticed that often do the most important work. Thank you for everything you do. There was a quiet pause, and Keanu could feel the shift in the air. It wasn't a loud moment, nor was it anything that would make the headlines. But it was real, and it was powerful. It was a moment of connection that transcended the roles people played. Actor, crew member, assistant. Because in that moment, they were all just people. As Keanu moved on to get ready for his next scene, he couldn't shake the feeling that something deep had shifted inside him. This wasn't about being a celebrity, nor was it about doing a good deed. It was about recognizing the humanity in others, the struggles, the dreams, and the stories that everyone carried with them. It was about offering a simple gesture of kindness, whether it was a smile, a word of encouragement, or the acknowledgement that someone's efforts mattered. Keanu realized that in reaching out to others, he was also reaching into his own soul. The more he connected with people, the more he understood the depth of his own journey. He had spent much of his life trying to protect himself from the vulnerabilities that came with being a public figure. But now, he understood that it was in those vulnerabilities, in the spaces where connection happened, that true meaning was found. The ripple effect that had started with a few small acts of kindness had grown into something far greater than Keanu had ever anticipated. It wasn't just about him helping others. It was about the way that kindness had been passed on, how it had touched the lives of the people he had encountered, and how it was now rippling outward, spreading across the set and beyond. Keanu smiled to himself, knowing that the true power of kindness wasn't in the recognition or the accolades. It was in the quiet, unseen moments where lives could be touched, where hearts could be opened, and where the world could shift, one connection at a time.